Indeed, as I walked here, I had the advantage of seeing some of the most celebrated books written by Antachek Diop, who speaks with greater depth about pre-colonial Africa. And one can talk about that. When we talk about redefining Africa, it must not be lost on us that the continent continues to be divided and undermined because of that very recent history of colonization. We are the only continent in the world, as you well know, that still describes ourselves as Francophone, to mean that we speak French, so that if there was an African meeting, the Malians, the Mauritanians, the Togolese, the Beninois, the Gabonese, the Congolese, the Senegalese, the Tunisians, the Moroccans, the Chadians, the Burkinabe, and the Cote d'Ivoirians would describe themselves as Francophone. These are things that divide us and define us. And those who claim to speak English, Kenyans, Ugandans, Tanzanians, Sudanese, South Sudanese, Malawians, Zambians, Namibians, and many others, including Zimbabwe, would say that they are Anglophones. And that too defines us and divides us. When you look at the Portuguese, the Cabo Verdeans, the Guinea-Bissau, the Angolans, the Mozambicans would define themselves as Lusophones because they claim to speak English, or rather speak Portuguese. And that defines and divides us. There is something that today is also described as Arabophone. Those who speak Arabic. If you go to Sudan, Egypt, to a certain extent Tunisia and Libya, and even Mauritania, they define themselves as such. I will not have mentioned Djibouti, I'll not have mentioned Somalia, I'll not have mentioned Ethiopia, I'll not have mentioned Comoro or Seychelles of Madagascar. But there is a sense in which that is how we define ourselves. One can speak about that when one is talking about redefining Africa. And those of you who are in the diaspora, in a manner of speaking, the African question and African condition can be said to be one that is properly understood and well written about. Indeed, many times when I have the occasion such as this, maternal mortality was reduced, that they were going to ensure that infant mortality was eliminated, and fundamentally that the disease burden would be reduced if not eliminated. That is how clear the diagnosis was in 1963. They were also clear that ignorance was a contributing factor, and that we had been so thoroughly under-educated or miseducated, as Carter G. Woodson had said a little earlier in 1933 of the American in his book, Miseducation of the Negro, which word you did not want to verbalize. And the most important thing was that we did appreciate that we had been miseducated, and so clear was the articulation of this. And if you go to many African schools and many African countries at that time, we built many universities. Those of you who come from Liberia or Sierra Leone will know that in those early days, the universities that existed at that time were universities such as Fura Bay in Freetown in Sierra Leone, which was a leading institution then and even now known as the Athens of Africa, because it was the residence of knowledge. That was Africa, identifying her problems. We also recognized that poverty was an issue. And we assumed that having regained independence, we would deploy our intellectual resources and our other resources to ensure that our men and women would not labor under economic desperation. Ghana regained our independence slightly over 60 years ago, and today, the question may be posed, has Africa conquered her identified enemies? Have the ghosts been exorcised? And if you look at Africa today, it is very easy to be depressed. It is easy to be depressed because, as I speak to you now, many African countries do not know peace. And if they know something that is a semblance of peace, it is merely a lull before some storm. Look at Africa now. Look at Ethiopia, which we thought was moving in the right direction. After the civil war in 1984, when the Derg regime had been eliminated, we thought that Ethiopia had been immunized against conflict. Today, there is a fratricidal war going on there in Tigray. People are now identifying themselves not as Ethiopians. And there is no problem with identity, but this identity is of the negative kind. Tigray, because they are Amhara, our enemies. There is no peace and quiet in that land with 100 million Africans, which is a resource which could be deployed effectively. And if today you asked a young Ethiopian in Mekelle, or in Lalibela, or in Addis Ababa, they would want to run away to some far distant country. And I'm quite certain that if you went to Eritrea and you talked to some young man or woman in Asmara, they would want to run away to Dubai or to South Africa. But even in that South Africa that you want to run away to, look at what happened in the last 1 week. That country which was the beacon of hope, the home of the Cape of Good Hope, is now become the Cape of Hopelessness. Brother rising against brother, and suddenly that country that we refer to as the rainbow country is now producing thunder and lightning. And one wonders whether the dreams of the founding fathers of that nation, Albert Lutuli, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, and Chris Hani, whether that country will remain the country that we expected it to be. That depresses one. You go down, you go up a little. Only 1 or 2 weeks ago, in the only absolute monarchy in Africa, in Eswatini, you saw what was happening in the streets of Mbambane. Africa is not at ease. And you go up north in Mozambique, that great land of Eduardo Mondlane and Samora Moises Machel. Up there in Cabo Delgado, we now have the entire population in disarray. This is Africa for you. And I'm trying to demonstrate that Africa can be depressing. And you don't stop there. Go to the eastern part of Congo. You know, about 2 months ago, the Belgians said that they were returning the only physical remain of Patrice Emery Lumumba, his tooth. Somebody once said that until they bury Patrice Emery Lumumba, Congo will know no peace. Perhaps. Go to the eastern part of Congo. That is perhaps one of the richest countries on the continent of Africa. But the Congolese are happier when they are in Matonge in Brussels, in Belgium. They are running away. That is Africa for you. And if you go up north, the Central African Republic in Bangui, unrest. You go to Chad, unrest. You go to Burkina Faso, that land of Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara, unrest. Go to Mauritania, unrest. Go to Mali, unrest. Go to Cameroon, the Ambazonians are not at ease. Go to Senegal, the Casamance, they are not at ease. Go to Nigeria. That is Africa. It can be depressing. And that is how I understand why many Africans sometimes leave the motherland in order to seek fortune elsewhere. But as the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah said, even when you leave the mother continent resides in you. And that is why even when you are geographically separated from her, the good doctor, you must still have a medical scheme for your kith and kin several thousand miles away. That is why my good friend Lawyer Ongeri says, I cannot sit here in the comfort of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I must go back home and try to change the mother continent. You know, what you are doing is not new. Others have done it before. In the 19th century, Marcus Garvey of Jamaica tried to do the same thing. William of Trinidad tried to do the same thing. W.E.B. Du Bois tried to do the same thing. In his own unique way, Martin Luther King Jr. tried to do the same thing, not about physical migration, but about temperamental and intellectual migration so that you regain your self-esteem. Malcolm X tried to do the same thing. Stokely Carmichael, who was mentioned here, have tried to do the same thing. Louis Farrakhan tries to do the same thing. My good friend Al Sharpton tries to do the same thing. There is a sense in which that thing to make Africa work is something that we cannot abandon. And you know, throughout history, it is the men and women in different civilizations, who sojourned in far distant lands, that brought a breath of fresh air to their mother continents. The Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah was here as a student in Lincoln. That is where the spirit of Pan-Africanism caught him. Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria was here. And therefore, when we want and talk about redefining Africa, we must not allow what we consider to be the dark circumstances to dampen our spirit.